Welcome to the PR Hotline podcast, your first call for PR fixes. This is the podcast where we tackle the problems that keep PRs and marketing professionals up at night, from client chaos to career issues, and break down some of the industry's best campaigns along the way. Each week, we're joined by a different guest who brings their own honest take on the highs, lows, and lessons of working in PR and marketing. Today's episode touches on something that's unfortunately become far too common in our industry: redundancy. If you've recently been made redundant, are going through it right now, or are quietly worrying that it could be around the corner, please know you're not alone. Something that so many people experience, but we rarely talk about the emotional toll it takes or how to navigate life after it happens. Our guest this week is Maja, who was recently made redundant from a London-based digital agency. She's here to speak really openly about what that experience was like, from the initial feelings of shame and confusion, to how she structured her days, stayed motivated, and started thinking more intentionally about what she wants from her career. Let's get into it.
Oh, I think you did a great job there, talking about the last couple of years working at a London-based digital agency. Previous to that, I had kind of a really wide array of experience, everything from hospitality management to sales, and I think kind of gathering a lot of different skills that put me in a really good stead for a client services role, which is where I was. And then, a few months ago, my agency offered redundancy packages to certain members of the client services team. But I think just really, really excited to go through some of the questions with you. Obviously, a topic very close to my heart, something I think about every day when I wake up in the morning. And I'm sure there are lots of people out there with the same experience. So let's get into it.
So if I was to take you back to basically the first time you were told about the voluntary redundancies and things like that, what would you say was kind of like going through your mind at that moment? Were you immediately kind of like ready to take a redundancy, or is it something that you've kind of had a bit of a battle with? How did you come to that decision?
So I think kind of the first emotion I felt, and I think this is because we don't talk about redundancy enough, the first thing I felt was actually almost like ashamed. Like, have I not been doing my job right? Why is my department not financially supporting ourselves within the company? What have we done wrong? And so I went away and I spoke to peers, I spoke to friends, I spoke to family, my parents, and all of a sudden realized I knew more people who'd been made redundant than had not. And I was working with people who'd been made redundant 3-4 times at different agencies. And that kind of communicating with people around me really helped shake that initial feeling of what have I done wrong, to go, no, this is absolutely just part and parcel for this industry. It's just how it goes. And I think because we're so reliant on retainers and various contracts, if you work in an agency that is reliant very much on certain large projects, if you lose a couple of those in the same period, then redundancies are inevitable. So that was the first thing I thought. And then to go back to your question, asking how I kind of where my decision went next, I think it wasn't necessarily an immediate decision for me, but I kind of looked around and thought, is this actually where I want to be? Is this the industry I want to be in? This is, redundancies coming with a payout. They offer you an opportunity to think.
Made you rethink.
They can offer you an opportunity to think quite deeply about what is it you want to do. I've got all sorts of different experience. Do I want to continue down this exact route? Do I want to pick up some new skills and enter a different, slightly diagonal industry? And something that I've been working on is actually creating a career path in my head and on paper, and kind of going, right, this is where you want to be in 20 years. What are the steps we need to take to get there? And I think working in an agency, as you'll both know, you're so busy all of the time, always just thinking about, getting through, not even day to day, but task to task, just get through this hour, then the next hour, then the next hour. And you don't always have the time to sit down and think, where do I want my career to go? Yeah. Where do I want my career to go? Do I need more qualifications? Do I need to do a course? Do I need to, maybe apply for a different role at a different agency or within my agency? So it gives you that opportunity, which in itself is a very daunting thing to have spare time.
So it's interesting that your initial reaction wasn't like, shit, I've got no income, blah, blah, blah. You were thinking about how this is going to affect your career and everything like that. So it's an interesting thought process within it. I've never actually thought of it that way, about having to then think about how your career will go after that, because obviously it is something that kind of puts a stint in your progression, that kind of thing. If you've
been working towards a promotion and then were made redundant, and you can't get back to that same point at another agency. So yeah, it's interesting that that was your kind of thought process within that.
The financial worries are obviously something that you immediately go to. But I was lucky and privileged enough to be in a different situation to some other people who were made redundant at the same time as me. One woman was 2 days back from maternity leave, and because she'd taken an extended maternity leave, she'd been living off her savings, which meant they were completely depleted by the time she returned. And, you know, compared to that, as a single person, only supporting myself, it didn't, I guess I had a direct point of comparison. Like, yes, I was stressed about money. Everyone's always stressed about money. But compared to what she was experiencing, I felt quite lucky almost to not have to worry about children and fees and looking after anybody else.
Yeah. You can't plan for these things, can you? Like you say, in businesses and agencies, there's often a lot of things going on behind the scenes, but for people on the receiving end, redundancies can feel quite sudden. So my question to you is, are there any signs beforehand that hinted that the agency were perhaps making cuts or anything to be aware of?
It's one of those hindsight's a wonderful things. With the knowledge that I have now, I look back at that time and go, oh, that was so obvious. But I had never obviously experienced a company going through redundancies before. And it was quite interesting because I spoke to friends who have more senior roles than me. And when I spoke about certain conversations I'd had at my agency beforehand, they'd all said to me, like, run. You know, there are financial issues there. You need to get out. And I was like, no, it's fine. And it clearly wasn't. So great learning experience for me. But I think it was also a shock to a lot of people within the agency.
So we've kind of briefly touched upon it before about like kind of the emotional side. You had a lot of your friends and family there to support you and make you see they had a lot of experience with being made redundant and things like that. But in terms of like the emotional side of being made redundant, how did you kind of like handle that both in the agency? Like, how did you communicate with your colleagues? How did you talk to your colleagues about it and then kind of exit the business? And then how have you handled it personally? And is there any kind of ways that you would maybe go about it differently now, or anything like that you can offer to somebody else who might be going through something similar?
I think when I had not my final day, but one of my final days where everyone was in the office and we'd all gone for a drink after work, and it was actually the day, now I think of it, when the whole agency had been told that I'd taken a redundancy and I would be leaving. And the woman who'd been running the redundancy process kind of took me to a side and she said, I just want to say I've handled lots of redundancies in my time and no one's ever had as much grace for the process as you've had. And at the time, I felt like, you know what? I've chosen to be respectful. I've chosen to be as kind of thoughtful as possible. I worked in extended notice. I didn't do things like update my LinkedIn settings to say open to work or amend anything publicly. I kept quiet to clients about certain things. I kind of ran the party line, so to speak, because I didn't want to have a negative impact on any of my colleagues because I cared deeply for a number of them. I think reflecting back, I would go back to myself and say, yeah, it's great to leave a business without burning bridges, to know that you've left some like good relationships there, and you don't have to feel uncomfortable about anything to do with the business. But I would go back to myself and say, be a bit more selfish, cut a few more corners. You know, they've made you redundant. Why are you still going into the office every day? Why are you still working 8 hours a day? No one would begrudge you if you spent an hour of that time a day, you know what, updating your LinkedIn and reaching out, making connections. I could have been pushier with asking to update my LinkedIn. I think I finally got permission to update my LinkedIn 2 weeks before my final day. When I'd been told I'd been made redundant 6 weeks before that. So yeah, that would be my kind of advice to myself. You can be graceful and you can leave without being a dick, basically, but you can still be a little bit more selfish.
Yeah, definitely. 100% agree with that.
You touched on a little bit of like the positives of that situation there as well. Obviously, losing a job is never easy. And unfortunately, that has become quite a harsh reality for many people in the PR industry. Why do you think PR teams are often first in line when there are cuts?
I think, and we've talked a bit about my client services experience, but I got into digital marketing through digital PR. I just talked too much and got moved teams. I think it's a deep misunderstanding of what digital PR is. I think that CEOs are not the best at shouting out about the wins of the PR team and how that benefits them from a digital perspective. I think there's a misunderstanding of the difference between traditional and digital, and often agencies who have traditional in-house or separate agencies, they will see it as kind of you're both going for the same links or you both have the same purpose, when you don't at all.
Yeah.
I mean, I was shocked at how many people I worked with who were colleagues. We were all at a digital marketing agency and they didn't get digital PR. They didn't understand the value of a link. They didn't understand why we did what we did. And so when it came to budget cuts, you know, when they're looking at their agency retainers and they're going, well, SEO is kind of this much and paid is this much and content is this much and PR is, wow, PR is a big chunk of it. And we get like, what, 10 links a month? What impact can 10 links possibly have? And that's why I think they're one of the first things to be cut from a client retainer perspective, which then has a knock-on effect on redundancies within the agency. Because if you don't have as many clients as, say, the SEO team, then they're not going to need as many staff members, and that's the way the agency looks at it. And I think also something to remember is a lot of the people that make these decisions about redundancies within agencies, they're finance people, they're HR people, they're people who again don't understand PR because it's not their job to. And if you don't have kind of strategy directors or team leaders who are good enough at shouting about your value as a team, then those finance people, those heads of within your kind of C-suite who are making those decisions about redundancies, they aren't going to know how valuable you are to the business.
I mean, I've experienced that multiple times, and I definitely think it's something that Grace and I will probably touch upon on another podcast about showing value with PR to clients and everyone like that. But in terms of any other kind of teams that you see get kind of like cut first, is there anything like client services that you think is like quite in the dangerous zone in terms of being cut?
I think client services nowadays, but also anything remotely admin related, anything, and I'm not saying all client services admin, we're not at all. We're kind of a cross between, I would say, sales and project management almost. I think there's now an expectation on delivery team members that they have to have better social skills almost. They have to be able to pitch. They have to be able to join a call, uphold a relationship with a client, you know, ask the right questions, dig for the right answers in a strategic way. They have to be able to take their own notes and action those. They have more admin-based responsibilities that would usually sit within client services, as there are more cost-cutting measures within agencies. And I think it's great that delivery teams are improving their skill breadth, not just focusing on, I'm really great at PR and I'm really great at this role, having to think, okay, but I have to think about the wider concept of the agency. And this client has, you know, made a few comments that make me think they might have more budget than they have with us. And maybe we could steal some of that budget. Maybe there are proprietary software tools that we work with that I could pitch to them. So I think nowadays, because delivery teams are expected more to fulfill a lot of those roles, having an entire dedicated client services team in smaller agencies just doesn't seem worth it anymore. And I think it is going to become something that is almost owned by those larger worldwide agencies, because for them, it's absolutely worth it putting that money into that. Like I say, it's almost just a sales service.
So I was reading something earlier today. I was reading a Reddit thread about basically people in the digital space that had been unemployed. And there was somebody that was still in the midst of like a job search, and it had been like 10 months since that they'd been kind of searching for a job. So I know that you're still in the thick of searching for jobs. So can you let us know a bit more about how it's been going so far, how you feel it is in this kind of like landscape that we're in within the agencies and kind of PR space as well?
I think from a client services perspective, first of all, the role availability is shrinking. There are loads of jobs advertised for account directors and really senior people with a decade at least of experience and loads of knowledge, and then very, very junior bottom of the barrel roles. And that kind of mid-section, your junior to senior account manager section, which would be filled by people with my kind of experience level, who are absolutely not channel experts, but who do have a number of skills that they're looking to develop. Those roles are kind of shrinking, or availability for them. And a lot of the people who would typically have gone for the more senior director roles are being forced to apply for senior roles, and it's causing this kind of knock-on effect if everyone's fighting. They're basically too many people fighting for too few roles in a shrinking industry. In general, I think there are a lot of fears around not just job security, but it's quite a difficult time politically. There's a lot of upheaval in the UK. Our government are making a lot of choices that are quite surprising and shocking to people. We have fears about, are we going to have to think about privatised healthcare costs in the next 12 months? That's a realistic fear that people have. If we look across the pond, obviously everything going on in the States, so much upheaval there. And a lot of us work for global agencies, or at least with international clients. You can't just think about the political climate in your own country. You have to think about the world. I think the impact that's having in general is it's making people a lot more, play it a bit more safe, I think, in terms of employment, employing. They would rather, stick with a smaller team when people leave than reach out and employ new people. There are, just a lot less roles available. And in my opinion, that does have a lot to do with how stressful I think everything going on politically, socially in the world at the moment is.
So we've touched on hindsight quite a lot throughout the conversation. And I know you've mentioned around LinkedIn and things like that. But is there anything you would have done differently to perhaps prepare yourself for something like this? Is redundancy something that we should all be prepared for in case of the eventuality? Or is there anything you would do differently?
Yeah, I think I would assume it was going to happen rather than hope it doesn't, if that makes sense. So just be a little bit more negative in my way of thinking, but a bit more proactive in kind of preparing myself. I think the number one mistake I made was I have so many brilliant relationships with my clients, and a lot of them, when I initially told them, by the way, I'm leaving the agency, I've taken a redundancy, I'm not going on into further employment. So many of them said, what can I do to help? And I, at the time, said LinkedIn recommendations would be great. What I should have done is almost drafted things for people, sent them out to them, been really cheeky and said, hey, you offered on a call last week to write a recommendation for me. Do you want to reword this and post it for me? That would be fantastic. Out of all of the offers that I had, because I left it too long to chase, I was no longer chasing with the client email they'd known. It would have been reaching out with a new email they didn't have access to. There's also, I think, some of that anxiety you have of, were they just saying it to be nice? I'd kind of go back in time and say to myself, no, be cheeky.
Yeah.
What's the worst that happens? They say no.
I think it's about protecting your personal brand online and offline. And like you say, be cheeky and protecting yourself.
I think you've kind of given the best advice you could give anybody there, and just be a bit more selfish when it comes to your last few weeks at an agency. In terms of when you were first made redundant, or just things over the past couple of months that have really helped you, is there particular people that have really helped you? Is there advice, any routines that you've been doing personally just to keep you motivated and things like that, or any websites or anything that you've kind of been referring to kind of help you to navigate this period?
So as someone with ADHD, my main fear had been sinking into a routineless black hole. So I've been really strict with myself in enforcing a job schedule. There's a time that I wake up. There is this is the time I do this. This is the time I do that. And it's like I've gone back to school. I've even got break times kind of planned in throughout the day. This is when you have a cup of tea. This is when you go for a walk. This is, because
I guess when you don't have that work to give you that schedule and that kind of routine, then it is hard just to stay in that mindset.
Exactly. And, as a meal prepper, there would be times when I would realize I'd not left the house in 3 days because I didn't need to. There's nothing taking me outside. So I almost needed to enforce it. And again, this is particular to me as a person with ADHD. It might not necessarily be relevant for everybody, but I would also need to enforce on myself fun time, because it's really easy. And I think as freelancers, you probably understand this as well. Any time that you're not working, or in my case, applying for jobs, there's this level of guilt going, well, I could be right now. I could be doing that. That's something I could be doing. And it's hard to say to yourself, but you would burn out. Yeah. There's only so much you can do in a day. So I have rules for myself. I have to read a certain number of chapters of my book. I have to make sure I speak to somebody on the phone. I have to make sure I go for a walk. And I think that's helped me stay kind of mentally focused, because it is quite a difficult thing facing rejection, I think, all day long. Even if you don't get a response back, even if you don't get to an interview stage, it's a form of rejection. And so a way to, if I had no routine, if I was getting up whenever I wanted, if I was eating whatever I wanted whenever I wanted, and then still not seeing any movement in the job market, I think I would get really depressed, really. So yeah, that's the big thing for me. I've had a great support system of friends and family as well. But yeah, as someone living alone in London, team has been the most important thing for me.
I can see how it's so easy to get really down when you're going through being made redundant and you're sort of living in redundancy and applying for roles. I know we have touched on it slightly throughout, but if someone is listening right now that has just been made redundant, what is one thing that you would tell them to do that would maybe help them move forward?
I would say build relationships with recruiters when you're not desperate. So instead of waiting for I've been made redundant, or I've lost my job, or this is no longer somewhere I can work, I'm too stressed, I'm too anxious, I'm burnt out, I need to leave. And before you reach that point, speak to recruiters and basically build those relationships with them, and they'll respect you more if you come to them and say, look, I'm not looking to move desperately right now, but in the next few months, if you've got anything that meets these salary requirements, or is more senior than where I currently am, or even if it's as simple as I'm currently working with mainly travel clients and I really want to be in the financial sector. If anyone comes across your desk that's, got a really big portfolio of financial clients, then give me a call. I might be interested. And I think if you kind of have those avenues open, then if you were to call that person and say, so, we spoke 3 months ago and I said I wasn't looking. Well, I'm really looking now. Yeah. They already know about you. They've already had you on their mind. So that would be the advice. That's not something I did. That's something I had to start out new and build relationships with recruiters and that kind of thing. But upon reflection and having spoken to other people who've gone through redundancies, the difference in time between me getting a role and them getting a role, I think does come down to they already had relationships and friendships with these people.
So thank you so much, Maja, for talking us through your kind of experience in the moment. We are going on to a slightly more lighter topic now, and we're basically going to be talking through a campaign that you've brought in to talk about, that we're going to basically discuss. We're going to talk about the impact on the industry, whether it's been successful, what we would maybe do differently, or what it's done really well. And this is something that we do with guests every week. Yeah, we're really excited to see what you've brought for us.
So I'm a big fan of an unconventional partnership. And, within the kind of the PR Insider newsletter, some of my favorite campaigns every week are always the ones that make you go, they're working together. I think it's a really, really clever move if done right by a brand. And so the campaign that has really caught my eye recently was the Ordinaries campaign, where they're selling eggs in New York. So it's very topical. It's obviously very, very topical. And I think it's very interesting to me that they've taken advantage of something that most food brands wouldn't want to touch, never mind a beauty brand. They don't have to go there. It's not something they have to be reactive with as an industry. And they've chosen to do so. So just to give you a brief overview, although I'm sure you'll link the campaign somewhere. Yeah. Have you seen this one, Grace?
Yeah, I have seen it going around, actually. I haven't actually delved too much into the details of it, but I know it's definitely got a lot of people talking.
So basically, the swine flu outbreak in America has led to huge price surges. It's something people have been talking about. One of the big things that Trump ran on last year was bringing down egg prices, which he's not successfully done yet. And so the Ordinary have come out with cartons of eggs. That's it. Bog standard, plain. They're selling cartons of eggs for $3.37, which is an ordinary price, they're calling it. And it's obviously a PR move. It's not meant to be profitable. They're not trying to make money on eggs. But I think it's such a clever way of making people think about them in a setting where they wouldn't usually belong. Everybody buys eggs. This is a talking point across the world, because it's not just about the price of the eggs. It's not just about the fact that eggs are expensive in the States. It's also about the kind of the political implications to the price.
So I'm going to say my opinion about it, and I don't like it because I think it's trying to make light of a situation that is affecting quite a lot of people across the States. I mean, like, for example, I've seen a TikToker that I follow who's a baker, and it's been really hard for her to like find eggs and things like that. And obviously that's affecting her business. And I've seen it kind of like from that perspective rather. I do get it, and I get it that it's supposed to be this disruptive campaign, but I kind of think it's a bit on the edge. Like, think it might be a bit too far. And it was like, I'm sure from what I read about it, it was going to be like in New York, in quite an affluent area in New York, they were doing this pop-up where they were giving the eggs away. Can't remember. I'm going to correct myself if I'm wrong there. So I just think it kind of like wasn't the right time to do something like that. I think if it is something that's affecting just generic people across the States, I don't think it's something that you kind of like offer. I don't know. I can get it from a perspective, like I said, of disruption, of it is doing something nice in terms of offering eggs at a lower price, but they're not relevant to the food industry, and I don't know.
I see your point. That's quite interesting because I hadn't thought about it from that perspective. I was thinking purely PR brain. I think it's a really thought-provoking partnership, but I see what you mean about it potentially taking advantage of quite a negative situation. I do think brands have to be careful with that. They've not faced any backlash around it as far as I can see, or nothing brand threatening like we've seen with some partnerships. I mean, talk about Dylan Mulvaney and Budweiser. That was, their stock prices dropped hugely. This is nothing, any backlash they've faced has been temporary. So I think yeah, it's a risky strategy, which is why from an outsider's perspective, it's interesting to me.
Just to add on to that, I've just looked at the thing. And basically, because The Ordinary are usually seen as a kind of like a vegan-friendly brand, they're also getting a kind of like a lot of backlash from it from their customers who will probably buy them for that reason.
Do they have a vegan element?
They're cruelty-free, vegan. Let me have another look.
I think it's just because they happen to be vegan, it wouldn't be fair to them. I mean, I'm going to compare them to Lush. Lush really pushed the vegan element, and if they turn around and started selling eggs, I think absolutely wrong for a brand from a branding perspective. I don't think The Ordinary really push the vegan thing. They just so happen to be vegan, and I think cruelty free in the West at least is almost something you have to do. I don't think non-cruelty free brands would take off or survive anymore. We've got some of the big ones who still aren't. Don't quote me on this, but I don't think L'Oreal are cruelty-free all the time and stuff like that. But they managed to survive because they've been around for a century. I think newer brands like The Ordinary almost have to be cruelty-free. It's not necessarily something that's huge for them as a brand.
They do have a whole section about being vegan and cruelty-free, and they're PETA certified. PETA, however you say it.
PETA.
So I don't know. I mean, that's definitely two perspectives. I saw it and thought, not a big fan of this. I think there was a different way to go about things like that. But I can also, like I said, see it from that disruptive element that a lot of brands like to do. And to be fair, I'm just glad it's not one of those horrible, not horrible, because some of them are nice, but like the AI generated, and it's like flowers all over the Big Ben. I feel like that's been so overdone now that, like, as long as it's not something like that.
I mean, I normally admire The Ordinary from their marketing and PR perspective, but I think there's a time and a place for like political influencing campaigns, and I don't know. I think I agree with you, Thea, that this just wasn't it for me.
2 against 1, Maja.
Do you know what's quite interesting for me about that is obviously you two are both PRs. So you are thinking from the perspective of someone who would create and run these campaigns.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking from a more kind of like the wider perspective of as if I was within the brand. So yeah, very interesting to me that we've come into this with those two very separate opinions depending on the way we think about those campaigns in general. I mean, you'll have experience running those campaigns. Well, I don't. So the levels of scrutiny this will have been through. How many people have signed off on this?
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode and being so open and honest about your experiences in redundancy. I'm sure it will help a lot of people out who have been through it or perhaps who are just preparing themselves for that eventuality. And thank you everyone else for listening. You can follow Maja on her socials. We'll drop them in the podcast notes, and hopefully we'll see you next time.